The castle of Frostmoor stood tall against the gray morning sky, its stone walls old and strong, holding centuries of history within them. Snow rested lightly on the rooftops, and smoke curled up from the kitchen chimneys as the staff began their day before the sun had even fully risen. Inside, the halls were quiet, except for the soft footsteps of servants moving from room to room, carrying baskets of linen, trays of food, and buckets of water. Among these servants was a young woman named Elena. She moved through the halls quickly, quietly, always keeping her eyes low and her sleeves pulled down over her wrists, no matter how warm the room was. The other maids liked her well enough, though they often said she was too quiet, too careful, like she was always waiting for something bad to happen. None of them knew how right they were. Elena had worked in the castle for almost 2 years. She was good at her job, efficient, polite, never causing trouble. She kept to a strict routine: wake before dawn, finish her chores before the sun was high, avoid unnecessary conversation, and disappear into her small room by nightfall. It wasn't that she disliked people, it was that she had learned, painfully, that drawing attention to herself never ended well. She was mated to a warrior named Garrick, a man who served in the king's lower ranks. When she had first been paired with him, years ago, she had felt something close to hope. He was strong, respected among the younger fighters, and for a while he had been kind to her. But kindness, she had learned, could disappear as quickly as morning frost under the sun. It started small. A sharp word here, a cold silence there. Then it became something else. Something Elena didn't like to think about, let alone speak of. Garrick's temper grew like a storm that never fully passed. If dinner wasn't ready on time, if she looked at another man for too long, if she simply forgot to smile when he walked through the door, his anger would rise, and Elena would pay for it in ways the world outside their home never saw. She had learned to hide the marks: long sleeves, careful movements, excuses ready on her tongue before anyone even asked a question. I fell. I bumped into the door. I'm just tired, that's all. The words came easily now, rehearsed so many times they barely felt like lies anymore. What made it worse was the silence around her. In Frostmoor, like many packs, a warrior's private life was rarely questioned. Strength was respected above almost everything else, and a mate's suffering was often seen as something to be endured, not interfered with. Elena had accepted this the way one accepts bad weather, something to survive, not something to fight. But peace, even quiet, hidden peace, cannot last forever when cruelty keeps growing. King Draven Ashford was not a man who raised his voice often. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled a room the moment he entered it. Broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every ounce of his power, Draven had ruled Frostmoor since he was young, taking the throne after his father's passing and proving, again and again, that he deserved it. He was known throughout the territories as fair, but firm. He listened before he judged. He rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal without hesitation. His wolf, sharp and instinctive, gave him senses far beyond an ordinary man. He could smell a lie before it left someone's mouth, sense fear even when it was carefully hidden behind a calm face. That evening, Draven returned to his private chambers later than usual, his mind still occupied with matters of trade agreements and border patrols. He expected the room to be empty, the fire already lit, the bed already prepared for the night, as it always was. Instead, he found Elena there, quietly finishing her work, unaware that he had entered. She was reaching up to straighten the curtain by the window, and as she stretched, her sleeve slipped down just slightly. It was only a second, barely anything at all, but Draven's eyes caught it immediately. A bruise, dark and clearly shaped like fingers, wrapped around her forearm. Elena noticed him a heartbeat later and quickly pulled her sleeve back down, bowing her head. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I didn't realize you'd returned. I'll be finished shortly." "What happened to your arm?" Draven asked, his voice calm but direct. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "I fell earlier. I'm clumsy sometimes." He said nothing more in that moment. He simply nodded, allowing her to finish her work and leave the room. But as she walked past him, his wolf stirred with something sharp and uneasy. The scent of fear clung to her, old and layered, like it had settled into her skin over a long time. It wasn't the fear of accidentally displeasing a king. It was something deeper, something that had been there for a long, long time. Draven had seen enough in his years of leadership to recognize the difference between an accident and a pattern. And what he had just seen was not an accident. He didn't confront her again that night. He understood, even without being told, that pushing too hard, too fast, would only make her retreat further into silence. Fear like that didn't loosen its grip easily, and if he wasn't careful, he could make things worse for her instead of better. Instead, he called for his most trusted beta, a steady, quiet man named Rowan, who had served him since they were both young. "I need you to find out everything you can about the maid who tends to my chambers," Draven said, quietly. "I don't want her to know we're asking." Rowan raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. By the next afternoon, he returned with what he had found, and it was more than either of them expected. Elena was mated to a warrior named Garrick, a man with a reputation for being hot-tempered but skilled in combat, which had, until now, kept most people from looking too closely at his behavior outside the training grounds. Rowan had spoken carefully with a few of the pack healers, framing his questions as routine health record checks, and had uncovered something troubling. Elena's name appeared in the infirmary records more times than any maid her age should. Sprained wrists, bruised ribs, a dislocated shoulder once explained away as a training accident, even though she had no reason to be anywhere near the training grounds. Each visit had a simple, forgettable explanation attached to it. Each one, alone, might have seemed like nothing. Together, they painted a clear and disturbing picture. Draven sat with this information for a long while that night, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. He was not a man who allowed his anger to control him, but this quiet, hidden suffering happening under his own roof, to someone under his protection, struck something deep and personal in him. He thought briefly of his own mother, who had passed years ago, and of the quiet strength she always carried, even during hard times. She had once told him that a true leader's job wasn't just to protect his territory from outside enemies, but to protect the people within it, especially the ones who had no voice loud enough to be heard on their own. Draven made his decision that night. He would not let this continue. He didn't act immediately, though every instinct told him to summon Garrick at once and demand answers. Instead, he thought carefully about how to handle it in a way that would truly help Elena, not just satisfy his own anger. The next evening, after her duties were finished and the halls had grown quiet, Draven found her again, this time not in his chambers, but in the small garden courtyard where she sometimes sat alone before returning to her room. She was startled to see him there, quickly standing and bowing. "Your Majesty, is something wrong?" "Sit," he said gently. "Please, I only want to talk." She hesitated but obeyed, lowering herself back onto the stone bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I know," Draven said simply. "I know about the bruises. I know they aren't from falling or from being clumsy. I know it isn't the first time." Elena's face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing at all, her eyes fixed on her hands. Then, quietly, almost too quiet to hear, she said, "Please don't say anything. It will only make things worse." "It won't," Draven said. "Not anymore. You have my word." "You don't understand," she whispered. He's not like this in front of others. No one believes it when I try to explain. They just see a strong warrior and a foolish maid who can't keep her own house in order." Draven's expression darkened, not at her, but at the situation itself. "I am not asking you to explain yourself to anyone. I already know enough. What I need from you now is the truth, so I can act on it properly, and so that whatever happens next is fair and just." Elena's composure, which she had held together for so long through sheer force of will, finally began to crack. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, She let herself speak honestly about what her life had truly become. She told him about the early days, when things had been good, when Garrick had made her laugh and made her feel safe. She told him how slowly, so slowly she hadn't even noticed at first, things had changed. How a single harsh word became a shove, and a shove became something worse. How she had stopped telling anyone, not because she wanted to protect him, but because she had learned that speaking up only led to more anger later, behind closed doors, where no one else could see. She told him about the isolation, how Garrick had discouraged her from getting too close to the other maids, how he always seemed to know if she spent too long talking to someone, how even small freedoms had slowly been taken from her until her entire world had shrunk down to survival, day by day. Draven listened to all of it without interrupting, his anger simmering quietly beneath a calm exterior, not directed at her, but at the situation, at the years this had been allowed to continue unnoticed. When she finally finished, exhausted and trembling, he spoke softly. "You are safe now. Whatever happens from here, that will not change. This is not your burden to carry alone anymore." That night, Draven called Rowan back to his chambers and gave clear instructions. Garrick was to be summoned at dawn, brought before the full council and any pack members present, with no explanation given beforehand. Draven wanted no opportunity for Garrick to prepare excuses, threaten Elena into silence, or twist the situation before the truth could be laid out plainly. He also arranged, quietly, for Elena to be moved to a different part of the castle for the night, somewhere safe and separate from where Garrick might find her. Sleep did not come easily to Draven that night. He sat by the fire in his chambers for a long while, thinking about leadership, about power, and about what it truly meant to protect the people who depended on him. He had built Frostmoor into a strong, respected territory, but strength meant little if it allowed cruelty to hide comfortably within its walls. By the time morning arrived, his resolve was set firm. Dawn broke cold and clear over Frostmoor. The great hall, usually reserved for formal gatherings and important announcements, filled slowly with pack members summoned at first light, murmuring quietly among themselves, unsure why they had been called together so suddenly. Garrick arrived, confused but not yet worried, assuming perhaps he was being recognized for some recent success in training or patrol duty. He stood near the front of the gathered crowd, glancing around with mild curiosity. When King Draven entered the hall, the room fell silent immediately, every head bowing in respect. He walked to the raised platform at the front, his expression unreadable, and stood there for a long moment before speaking. "I have called you all here today," Draven began, his voice steady and carrying easily through the hall, "to address a matter of great seriousness, one that touches on the very foundation of what it means to be part of this pack: trust, protection, and responsibility toward one another." He turned his gaze toward Garrick, who shifted slightly, his confusion beginning to turn into unease. "It has come to my attention," Draven continued, "that for over a year, a member of this pack has been subjecting his mate to repeated harm, behind closed doors, hidden from the eyes of those who might have helped her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Garrick's face paled. "Your Majesty, I don't know what—" "Do not interrupt me," Draven said, his voice sharpening just slightly, enough to silence the room completely. "I have spoken with the healers. I have seen the records. I have heard, directly, from the woman who has suffered this for far too long." He gestured, and Rowan stepped forward with a small stack of documents, the infirmary records, dates and injuries listed plainly, undeniable in their pattern. Bruises explained as accidents, injuries explained as clumsiness, a pattern repeated so many times that it can no longer be called coincidence. Garrick's jaw tightened. "She's exaggerating. She's always been dramatic, always causing problems between us. I never meant to hurt her seriously. It was just—" "There is no version of this explanation that makes it acceptable," Draven interrupted firmly. "A mate is not property to be controlled through fear. A mate is not someone whose pain can be excused because it happened quietly, in private, where no one else could see." He stepped down from the platform, walking closer to where Garrick stood, his presence commanding despite his measured, controlled tone. You had a bond built on trust, and you turned it into something that caused constant fear. That is not strength. That is a failure of everything this pack stands for. Garrick's expression shifted from fear to something closer to desperation. Your Majesty, please, I can change, This is not a matter of second chances, Draven said. This is a matter of consequence. Frostmoor does not protect those who harm the very people they are meant to cherish and protect. He turned to address the gathered crowd once more. As of this moment, Garrick is stripped of his rank within this pack. He is no longer welcome within the borders of Frostmoor territory, and he will receive no protection or support from this pack going forward. The words landed heavily across the hall. Banishment, especially without pack protection, was one of the most serious consequences that could be handed down. It meant facing the world entirely alone, without the safety and support that pack membership provided. Garrick's face went white. You can't. This is my home. My life is here. You made your choices, Draven said simply. Now you will live with them. Guards stepped forward at Draven's signal, escorting Garrick from the hall. He continued to protest as he was led away, but his voice grew fainter as the doors closed behind him, and the hall remained silent for a long moment afterward, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone present. News of what had occurred spread quickly through the castle and beyond, and while some were shocked, many others quietly admitted they had noticed small signs over the past year that they hadn't known how to interpret or address. Draven used the moment to speak plainly to his pack about the importance of looking out for one another, of not assuming that strength or reputation meant someone couldn't also be causing harm behind closed doors. For Elena, the days that followed felt strange, almost unreal. For the first time in years, she didn't have to plan her words carefully, didn't have to check the mood of the room before speaking, didn't have to hide her arms beneath long sleeves out of habit and fear. Draven ensured she received proper care from the pack healers, not just for her physical injuries, but time and space to begin healing from everything else as well. He offered her a new room within the castle, away from her old quarters and any lingering memories tied to them, and made it clear, without pressure, that she was free to take as much time as she needed before deciding what she wanted her life to look like going forward. At first, Elena struggled with the quiet. She wasn't used to safety, wasn't used to kindness without expectation attached to it, and some days she found herself waiting nervously for something to go wrong, for the peace to be temporary. But slowly, day by day, she began to relax. She began sleeping through the night without waking at every small sound. She began speaking more freely with the other maids, laughing occasionally, something she hadn't done in longer than she could remember. Draven checked on her from time to time, not as a king overseeing a servant, but simply as someone who genuinely wanted to know how she was doing. Their conversations were easy, unforced, often about small things, the weather, a book she was reading, a particularly stubborn winter storm that had kept the castle staff busy for days. There was no pressure in these visits, no expectation, just simple presence. Weeks turned into a couple of months, and Elena found herself looking forward to those quiet conversations more than she wanted to admit, even to herself. There was something steady and safe about Draven's presence, something that felt entirely different from anything she had experienced before. He never raised his voice, never made her feel small, never expected anything from her that she wasn't ready to give. One afternoon, she found him in the garden courtyard, the same place where he had first learned the truth about her past. She sat beside him this time, not out of duty, but because she wanted to. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not looking away." Draven turned to her, his expression soft, in a way rarely seen by anyone outside his closest circle. "You never should have had to endure that in silence. I only wish I had noticed sooner." "You noticed when it mattered," Elena said. "That's what counts." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last of the winter snow begin to melt at the edges of the courtyard, small signs of spring beginning to show through the frost. Elena's life, once shaped entirely by fear and careful survival, was slowly becoming something new, something built on safety, patience, and the quiet beginnings of trust. She wasn't in a rush to define what was growing between herself and Draven, and neither was he. For now, it was enough to simply exist without fear, to feel the sun on her face without flinching, to know that whatever came next, it would be her choice and hers alone. As spring arrived fully over Frostmoor, the castle grounds bloomed with new life, the gardens filling with color after months of gray winter. Elena walked through them freely now, her sleeves rolled up without a second thought, her laughter carrying easily across the courtyard whenever she spoke with the other maids. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the evening, King Draven would find her there among the flowers, and they would talk about nothing important at all, simply enjoying each other's company, two people slowly building something real out of the wreckage of what had come before. Her story, once defined by silence and hidden pain, had become something else entirely, a story of a woman who had finally been seen, finally been heard, and finally been given the chance to live without fear. And for Elena, that was more than enough to begin again,